Picture this, a group of early humans huddled around a fire 100,000 years ago. They're not just grunting or pointing. They're telling stories, planning tomorrow's hunt, sharing knowledge about which plants heal and which kill, teaching their children the wisdom of generations. This wasn't always possible. For millions of years, our ancestors walked the earth in silence, or at least without the complex language we take for granted today. But somewhere in our prehistoric past, something extraordinary happened. We learned to speak. This was the third great revolution in human evolution. First came tools, then fire, and finally, language, the invention that would separate us from every other species on Earth and transform us into the dominant force on the planet. But here's the problem. We don't know exactly when humans started speaking. Language doesn't fossilize. We can find stone tools from 2 million years ago. We can find evidence of controlled fire from 800,000 years back. But words vanish into the air the moment they're spoken. So how do scientists solve this mystery? They become detectives, searching for clues in our biology, our genes, our ancient bones, and the behavior of our prehistoric ancestors. Let's start with anatomy. To speak the way we do requires a very specific setup. You need a descended larynx, that's your voice box positioned low in your throat. Most mammals, including our primate cousins, have their larynx positioned high, which allows them to breathe and swallow at the same time. Useful, but it limits the range of sounds they can make. Humans sacrificed that safety feature. Our larynx dropped, creating a longer vocal tract. This gives us the ability to produce the incredible variety of sounds that make up human language. But there's a trade-off. We're the only mammals that can choke on our food. Evolution deemed the ability to communicate worth that risk. When did this change happen? By examining fossil skulls and the base of the cranium, scientists believe the modern human vocal tract was in place by at least 300,000 years ago, possibly earlier. Our species, Homo sapiens, had the hardware for complex speech from the very beginning, but hardware isn't enough. You also need the software, the brain wiring that makes language possible. In 2001, scientists made a breakthrough. They discovered a gene called FOXP2, sometimes called the language gene. People with mutations in this gene struggle with speech and grammar. They can think, they can understand, but forming and processing language becomes incredibly difficult. Here's where it gets fascinating. When scientists compared the FOXP2 gene across species, they found that humans have a unique version. The human form of FOXP2 differs from the chimpanzee version by just 2 amino acid substitutions. 2 tiny changes, but with massive consequences. When did these changes occur? By analyzing the gene across different human populations and using molecular clock techniques. Researchers estimate that the human version of FOXP2 became fixed in our species somewhere between 50,000 and 200,000 years ago. That's a big window, but it suggests that the biological capacity for modern language is relatively recent in evolutionary terms. But there's more to the story. In 2007, scientists discovered that Neanderthals, our closest extinct relatives, also carried the human version of FOXP2. This was stunning. It suggests that the common ancestor we shared with Neanderthals, living around 500,000 years ago, may have already possessed some form of complex communication. Did Neanderthals speak? The debate continues. But the evidence is mounting that they had at least some capacity for language. Their brains were as large as ours. Their vocal tracts were similar. They had FOXP2, and their behavior, creating art, burying their dead, using symbols, suggests the kind of abstract thinking that language makes possible. If we can't find language itself, we can look for its effects. And here's the key insight. Language doesn't just allow us to communicate, it transforms what we can accomplish as a species. Around 70,000 to 100,000 years ago, something changed in human behavior. Archaeologists call it the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, or the Great Leap Forward. Suddenly, the archaeological record explodes with evidence of symbolic thinking. Cave paintings appear. Not just simple marks, but sophisticated art depicting animals, humans, and abstract symbols. The famous paintings in Chauvet Cave in France date back 37,000 years and show such mastery that they could hang in a modern museum. Personal ornaments, emerged shell beads, carved pendants, ochre for body painting. These items serve no practical survival function. They're about identity, status, belonging. They're about communicating who you are to others. Complex tools become the norm, not just a sharp rock, but composite tools. Spear points hafted to wooden shafts with birch tar adhesive, requiring multiple steps and planning. The kind of planning that's much easier when you can explain the process in words. Long-distance trade networks develop. Shells from the coast appear hundreds of miles inland. Obsidian from specific volcanic sources travels across continents. This requires negotiation, trust, and the ability to communicate value and intent with strangers. All of this points to one conclusion. By 50,000 to 70,000 years ago, humans possessed fully modern language. We could tell stories, share abstract concepts, plan for the future, and pass down accumulated knowledge from generation to generation. But why does language matter so much? What makes it the third great revolution? First, language created cultural evolution. Before language, knowledge died with the individual. A prehistoric human might figure out a better way to hunt or find water. But that knowledge could only spread through observation and imitation slow and imperfect methods. With language, knowledge became transferable. One generation could teach the next explicitly. Wisdom could accumulate. This is why human technology accelerated so dramatically. Once we could speak, we didn't have to reinvent the wheel literally. We could stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. Second, language enabled cooperation at unprecedented scales. Other animals cooperate. Sure, but their groups are limited by personal relationships. You can only maintain so many individual bonds. Language allowed humans to create shared myths, shared identities, shared goals. We could cooperate with complete strangers because we could communicate about abstract concepts like tribe, trade, or territory. Third, language gave us theory of mind on steroids. We didn't just understand that others had thoughts and feelings, we could discuss them, we could plan together, deceive each other, tell jokes, express love, argue about what's right and wrong. Language made us not just intelligent, but socially and emotionally complex in ways no other species has matched. Finally, language made us time travelers. We're the only species that can mentally project ourselves into the past and future with such clarity. We tell stories about our ancestors. We plan for our grandchildren. We learn from history and imagine possibilities that don't yet exist. All of this is amplified and enabled by our ability to communicate in language. Despite all we've learned, mysteries remain. We still do want to know if language evolved gradually over millions of years or emerged suddenly in a cognitive revolution. We do want to know if there was one original human language or if language evolved independently in different populations. We don't know exactly what the first words were or what the first conversations sounded like. Some researchers, like linguist Noam Chomsky, argue that language is so unique and complex that it must have emerged suddenly, perhaps through a single genetic mutation that rewired the brain. Others believe language evolved incrementally, building on communication systems our ancestors already possessed. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Our ancestors likely used proto-languages, simpler communication systems that gradually became more sophisticated over hundreds of thousands of years. Then, at some point, perhaps around 100,000 years ago, something clicked. The pieces came together. Grammar emerged. Syntax developed. And humans began speaking in the rich, complex way we do today. Tools gave us the ability to shape the world. Fire gave us warmth, protection, and the means to transform our food and our environment. But language gave us ourselves. It gave us the ability to think in new ways, to share our inner worlds, to build on the knowledge of countless generations. It allowed us to create art, music, mathematics, philosophy, and science. It let us form civilizations, nation-states, and global networks of cooperation. Every story ever told, every song ever sung, every idea ever shared, all of it depends on that prehistoric revolution when our ancestors learned to speak. We are the storytelling ape, the teaching ape, the species that can take thoughts from one mind and plant them in another using nothing but vibrations in the air. And that ability, more than anything else, is what made us human. The third revolution wasn't just about communication. It was about becoming who we are. And in many ways that revolution is still ongoing. Every time we learn a new word, every time we share an idea, every time we connect with another human through the power of language.